think looks very good because it makes everybody feel shadowy, but you have to have it, otherwise they'll freak out because they can't read their music.
Oh yeah, good point.
I want them all to have iPads.
That's sort of the thing. So if one theater is called WPA, do they have another theater called FDR?
No.
It's an American history joke, people.
The other one's called CCC. And I don't mean yes.
Now, where did my actual tally thing go?
I don't think the big bridges in the Bay Area would have been built without the WPA. I think the Golden Gate and the Bay Bridge both greatly benefited from that. It's about the right era.
And this, I will say though, that this festival has been here for, I think, 84 years. And on the 80th anniversary, they had to make sure there were at least 80 concerts in the summer. It was kind of insane.
It's going to be hectic on the 100th anniversary.
Yeah, it's hectic all the time.
When I was a student in the early 80s, taking my first video production courses, there was a gentleman who used to come by and hang out. I think he was good friends with the instructor, and he was sort of an aide, I guess. And it was funny, both the instructor and this guy were really old. I am now older than they are, but they were really old at the time to me. And Win Smith was his name, and he used to come into the studio and he'd like sort of help while the students were fumbling and trying to light the different sets that they had to do each day. And he would always look at the set plot, and because people would mark where they want to put their key, where they want to put their fill, where they want to put their, because that was part of what you had to learn. Like, where am I going to put them? What circuit am I going to plug them into so they show up at the lighting board and everything? And very unsophisticated stuff. And Win would look at it and he'd go, well, these lights are pretty good. Why don't we just move the chair over 3 feet? We'll call that the key and the fill. And he was the master of cutting corners. And at the time I used to think that's just lazy. And now I'm like, I totally get that. That's 4 less trips up a ladder.
Yeah, I mean, and it has to do, like, now with this industry being about 30 to 40% decimated from people, just because I think after the pandemic, people were like, why are we working so hard? We're just going to go work at a corporate job. I don't know if that's what happened, but it feels like that's what happened.
Yeah. I got to run. I got to take my wife to work. I'll be back. Thanks, Chad.
Courtney, are you reading? Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about everything. It feels like everything around media production. In our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about DMX. So we're going to talk about what are the DMX universes, channels, DMX over IP. All of those things are going to be things we're covering. So if you've got questions about DMX, which is very important to understand, then throw those in right now. You can throw them into Meccano right now and ask those questions. And we'll be working our way through those DMX questions and giving you a little overview of how DMX works in the second hour. And again, if you have questions for the first hour, throw them in. We love getting up in the morning and having lots of questions at the beginning of the hour. We've got a lot of them this morning. So make sure to jump in and vote on the questions as well as ask those questions. Let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Courtney, what do we have?
All right. Coming in first, we have Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida. And he asks, he says, we want to display moderated social media comments and questions on stage at a hybrid event. What are the best practices for this setup?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Having a good team behind it. That's the bottom line. I remember one event, and this is pre-COVID, where they had a team that's actually filtering through the questions and comments. And then they send specific ones via a spreadsheet to the actual person, who would then do some more moderation, maybe take out a word that didn't make sense or anything like that. If the person didn't have an image in their social media, they'd put in a generic image instead of that person outline. They'd make something that kind of fit towards the event and everything like that. So if you get a good team doing that, you can pretty much do anything, including moderation and posting some great contents and back and forth.
Yeah, there's a couple, there's a variety of different pieces of software. There's Social Wall, Grid, Carousel. Those are all things that you can use to grab some of those things and make them actually work. I have to admit that I don't really post that many things from social, or we try to push people away from that, mostly because it seems like it's a good idea that you would do that, but you don't really attract the people that you think you're going to attract to these things. If someone has a significant following, which means that they've done this for a while, they will tend not to post anything for your event because it would junk up their own feed. And so posting social media comments are not usually getting anybody vertical at all, because that's not the behavior. And so usually we find that the comments are okay, but you're better off oftentimes if you have some kind of comment engine that you're using in your show. You're better off figuring out ways to pipe that in. Obviously, we use Meccano for that. We have display options that can go full screen and so on and so forth. But there's a lot of other ones that can be used as well. But you're better off in a hybrid event grabbing things not so much from social media, but from whatever question engine that you might be using, so that it's really applied to your system. But there's a lot of more risks than you think about posting social media. I know that it's popular, but we have found, you don't know what everything else that person with 50 subscribers has posted on their Instagram or on their Twitter. Oftentimes, if you dig any deeper into them past the post for your show, you may find things that you wished weren't on their connected to their platform. So the amount of work that you have to do that to really make sure that those work, I would recommend against using social media posts, and really look at whatever question system you're using to feed things of people who are actually at the event online and posting those through that system. Next question.
Jens Olson from Sandpoint, Idaho wants to know, what outdoor speakers or amp would you recommend for a permanent installation for backyard band practice? And their backyard is 20 acres. That's a big backyard.
Go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that you're talking about PA style speakers, not the little itty bitty speakers that you might hang all over your house. So for that, a lot of times some people want to go towards a powered speaker, and then of course put it in enclosures to protect the elements. What I like to do, if you have the ability to, is actually have that PA, that amp, sitting in a more enclosed area like a garage or a shed, and with proper air ventilation, and then run cables to the speakers, which are passive speakers. I'm not a big fan of going too expensive for backyard stuff. So if you're looking at a lower end, like a pile or something like that for speakers, you should be good. But yeah, you can definitely put almost any type of passive speaker up there, as long as you're not killing noise ordinances when you're practicing, and have fun.
Yeah, I will say that I've done a lot of outdoor speaker installation actually, and the hard part with passive speakers is that they, getting the impedance correct for the amp it turns out to be a thing when you start running really long speaker cables. So you just have to, that's why we tend to think about wanting to run power to them and then run signal to them. I mean, it is easier. You're absolutely right. It's much easier to run passive because it's only one cable, but oftentimes that can be a little bit more problematic in those areas. So that's the only thing that I would consider. I don't know there's a lot of like all-weather speakers, but when you're talking about a practice for band practice, I'm not sure what kind of band you're talking about. If you're talking about a rock and roll band, I think I would be thinking about more of how to have something that's easy to roll, set down and connect, as opposed to something that I'm going to leave out in the weather, and I don't know what kind of weather you have there, but I wouldn't leave most large speakers outside all the time. Next question.
Next one comes in from Brooklyn, New York, and it's from Mike Edwards. He says, "Morning, everyone. I'm looking for a biometric or keycard security system. What does the panel recommend, as well as any other security measures to keep things secure?"
Go ahead, John.
So as far as ease of use goes, Ubiquiti has a card access system. Unfortunately, they just came out with a new version, but unfortunately it's sold out right now. But for $600, they have a whole little package to get started. I would start looking there first.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of key card systems that you can get into. One of the things you want to start thinking about also, and depends on the regulations within the building you're in, or what your issues might be there, is when you think about a door, when you think about opening the door, think about whether it's going to be fail safe or fail secure. So fail secure means it's going to close up and it's not going to open if you lose power. So fail secure means that the lock stays in. Fail safe means it's going to pop open when you lose power. Power is a really key way that you end up having an open office. So you want to think about what that actually looks like for that. That's something that we think about a fair bit in that area. Cameras are obviously relatively useful as far as knowing what actually is happening and it allows you to check those things. Now, I have to admit, at the office, we've had some more secure things. In my house, I have Nest, a bunch of them, and so it's easy for me to get up to and make that actually work. But there's a lot of I would probably lean more towards biometric than cards at this point. I say that as someone who just loses their cards constantly. So I kind of wish that everybody was using biometric. There's a couple of them now that work on the phone. There's one company I've worked at that uses it with a watch, but I'm not sure how widely that works. Go ahead, Courtney.
One thing a lot of people don't consider is fire codes, because you have to allow egress in case of a fire. So you can't really lock up.
That's the fail secure, fail safe. Yeah, you have to have another way out.
Right. You have to, or you have to have a fire exit within the room. So make sure you check the fire codes in your area, and you may have to have a separate push to open from the inside that bypasses the security in case of a fire. Fire alarms are going off. You may need to tie it into your fire detection system too.
Next question.
Next one comes in from our friend David Brady in New York City. He says, "What are the leading platforms for VR or AR development, and how steep is the barrier to entry for a non-developer?"
I think that the one that's probably the least steep to build is probably Unity. So we built most of our AR and VR tools over the last, I don't know, I wouldn't say 10 years, but the last 8 years have been in Unity. And so I think that there's Unity and Unreal are your two platforms that most people are building some version of this with. I do think that, we're looking pretty seriously at, Apple's tools for the Apple headset, but that's only going to work for the Apple headset. So it depends on whether, when you look at AR and VR, are you looking at developing for the Apple headset, or you're looking at developing for many headsets? And so if you're looking at all the headsets, then I think that Unity would probably be something I'd consider pretty heavily, as well as Unreal. But the Unity, one of the big things between Unity and Unreal is Unreal spent a lot of time making sure that it was available to 2997, 5994, and Unity did not. It's in whole frames. And the reason that that's important is that Unity, it focused really on the devices and headsets and so on and so forth, Unreal made itself more available to production, and so Unreal has benefited from that. But that's one of the reasons you see so much Unreal is because it's really spent a lot of time looking at physical production as something that it was going to work on, as opposed to Unity, which stuck with games and devices. Because Apple has embraced it. If you're thinking about the Apple headset, you probably should be thinking pretty heavily about Unity and the Reality Composer Pro, which is Apple's device. And we're hoping to get somebody on to talk about Reality Composer Pro, and we'll be doing labs on it because I'm only focusing on that. So yeah, go ahead, Tlaloc.
I think also it's interesting to think about what your particular vertical is. If you're somebody who's worked in CAD a lot, and you can build objects in CAD, in vector CAD, then you can then port those over to Unity and Unreal and Cinema 4D and start building their surfaces in better ways. And then, you can have really detailed items. So I just think, depending on where you're sort of started from, then go from there.
Yeah, and there's definitely lots of tools that you can use to build the geometry that you need to put into it. The main thing is figuring out how you're going to interact with it, and that's the thing that's going to be the harder part. And I think that my opinion, just looking at it from the outside, is that Unity is kind of a stopgap for Apple because they just can't do all the features that Unity has. It lets a lot of current developers develop for the headset, but Reality Composer Pro is probably something to pay a lot of attention to if you're looking at the kind of holistic approach to that. If when you're asking about AR and VR, you're thinking about the Apple headset, I would see how far you can go in Apple Composer, the Reality Composer Pro. That's designed to hook into someone who's writing Xcode, and I would just start learning Xcode, so learning Swift. I wouldn't bother with older versions of coding for the Apple platform. I would just use Swift at this point. Apple's slowly kind of circling that and eliminating support for everything else. And so I think over the next 3 or 4 years, Swift will be the only only thing that you can write in for Apple. Yeah. Next question.
Next one comes in from didn't move there. Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts. And Craig wants to know, is there a way to remap or reuse the ATEM buttons, such as the audio that he's not using?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I don't think so. They don't expose that stuff in the API. I mean, you could design your own piece of touch software that has whatever buttons you want to, but I think the only buttons that are assignable on the ATEM Extreme and not on the Mini are the macro buttons. There's 6 of them over on the right side, and I think those are the only ones that you can actually reassign different stuff to.
Solid.
I think I have to sort of flip this question on its head because there isn't a good way to remap a lot of those buttons, and there are a lot of them. What you might want to do is remap how you control the ATEM onto a Stream Deck or otherwise, and then you can have those buttons do other things to other programs, other things, and then kind of combine all those buttons into one location, rather than relying on remapping the buttons on your ATEM.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating because there's so many buttons that we don't use. I would say a solid 3/4 of the buttons on my ATEM Extreme I've never actually pushed with any reason to use them. And so it would be great, to your point. The problem really is the polling of the ATEM. It's not giving out information, readily. So it's just not something that you can use to get that data. I don't even think it can be hacked to do that. So it's a little bit of a bummer because it is a lot of buttons that we could use for a lot of other things, and we haven't been able to. It has been a request. Maybe we'll gang up. We did. By the way, you might see in Discord, we did ask everybody to apply a little bit of pressure to Insta360 around the link. If you haven't seen that, please go to Discord, look at the Alex announcements, and we put it out to everyone. But we are now the #1 request in GitHub for upgrades for the Insta360, and we'd like to keep pushing that up. So if you're willing to go to Discord, look for that link and put that request in. As a group, I think we can kind of move things forward if we apply a little bit more pressure. Next question.
Next one comes in from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, Miele has introduced a smart food ID for their ovens, which uses artificial intelligence to detect what you are cooking and recommend suggested settings based on it. Could this and similar technology help people with disabilities or impairments be more independent?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, this kind of AI has been around in microwave ovens for many years now. They've, probably 20, 25 years now. The sensor cooking, it's kind of disappeared. They used to have the sharp microwaves, used to have sensors, and some ovens still do have temperature sensors that you insert in any food that you're cooking. Because obviously, to cook food correctly, you got to know what temperature it is on the inside. And that's one of the few ways to do that. So those kind of tools are available now and have been available for more than 20 years to cook things to perfection. Temperature controlled cooking can be done with sous vide because it's very slowly cooked and the temperature migrates slowly. So you don't have to worry about burning something on the outside and having it raw on the inside. But there are tools and technologies, infrared temperature sensors. Also, a lot of ovens these days have pre-built, templates for the type of food you're cooking. But unless it's got some type of internal temperature probe that you can stick in the food, it's hard to tell because of the moisture content of the food. Cooking is a tricky thing to handle automated, with automated. And unless it's got cameras in there to detect burning, I guess they could have sensors to detect when something is carbonized or your popcorn is, turning into a smoke bomb. But there are some sensors that help you and make things easier. And of course, there are templates on like every microwave for popcorn, heat up coffee, et cetera, that make things a lot easier.
Harshit?
Amazon has tried this in their space, and it just depends who's going to adopt the technology. Yes, it could be a helpful tool in the kitchen, but the ease of use, the usability part is always a challenge. So let's just say if we have something like Apple or Google or any of these other companies, with as far as the smartphones go, are they really conversing with these companies to help manufacture these products? Or is it just, hey, I can make my own AI and I'm going to say it's going to work best for you. But then again, no one asked the person that needs it, right? So sometimes people tend not to ask the disabled people how it works for them. They just try to make it first and say, here you go, try this out. And that doesn't always work out the best. So it's a good try. It's worth it. It's doable, but there's just that functionality of you open a box, you push a button, that workflow has to be pretty usable.
Yeah, I have a June oven, and we use it every day, all day. Like it's just constantly running, and it's got a camera in it. So you just put stuff into it, and it goes, "Hey, this looks like asparagus. Do you want me to cook this?" And it does a pretty good job. If anything, I think that it sides a little on the not wanting to burn it. I think they don't want you to leave feeling like we burned the thing. And so my only complaint is usually that it's a little underpowered as far as it doesn't quite make things as cooked as I like them, at least. But it does do a solid job. And so it does use the tools that you're talking about, and you most of the time you just put whatever you want in there and just tell it. And then if you adjust it, if you make it go longer, you can say save that. So now every time you see asparagus, cook it for 6 more minutes than what you thought it was supposed to be. So you can adjust that. The thing that to bring it back to production, the way we talk about it here, what's really useful about what June does, and Heston does it as well. They make pans that have Bluetooth inside the pan. And so Heston has these little Bluetooth, the pan has got a Bluetooth connector, and the burner, it's an induction burner, has a Bluetooth connection, which means that your phone talks to both of them. The pan can tell the phone what temperature it's at, and the phone tells the burner what to do. And what that means, if you tell it, I want to be at 450 degrees, it just goes whoop, and it just right up to it, and then it stops. And then it just stops giving it. And then every time it drops a little bit. And so it makes it a very accurate pan. And the reason that that's useful is because that's one of the big variables that people screw up when they cook is the heat, how the heat is. Everything, most of the other stuff is easy. And then what both June and Heston do is that they give you great video tutorials about how to do cooking. So they say, do this and cut the onions and cut the thing. And it has step by step. And you can build very complex things that are remarkably easy. And the reason I bring it up here is because I think it's a huge market that we haven't really tapped into yet, which is the wetware, of teaching people how to use the products, effectively and getting them involved. And I think that we're going to see more and more of that because a lot of these tools make it a lot easier to do things that are more complex. So while you want things to be done for you, I think that there's a certain value to teaching people how to use the product and how to build things that they didn't think they could build by eliminating some of the issues. And then, some of the variables, and then giving them still tutorials and, again, video training to make that work. Go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't seen any yet, but I'm wondering if there are any microwave ovens or other ovens that are voice controlled yet that you
Amazon.
can tell it. Do they make?
Amazon has one that does that. You can ask the A,
because for people with disabilities, that's a pretty good helper to have something that can be voice controlled without having to look at small menus or buttons or impossible to read gray on black buttons that they put on.
Yeah, absolutely. Harshid?
Amazon does have that. They have a Braille overlay as well. But again, as we talked about the usability, the app itself should be accessible. So, if I'm using the Amazon app, I should be able to voice my commands to say, make popcorn. And then it already knows it has a cup of popcorn in there. So it's the usability between the apps.
Yeah, absolutely. And a quick reminder that we still have plenty of time in the first hour. If you've got questions for us around media production, go ahead and throw those questions into Makana. Also, if you've got questions about DMX, throw those in for the second hour. Let's go ahead to the next question.
Next one comes in from Nathan Cashin in Oregon City. I suppose that's in Oregon. He says, Apple Vision Pro can display up to 22 8K video streams when connected to a Mac Pro. Will we see producers or technical directors wearing these in broadcast control rooms?
Go ahead, Courtney.
No, that's my answer. Because in a control room, the thing you need, the displays are up there for multiple people to see. And if one person is the only person that can see it, or spot something, it doesn't serve everybody else in there. And plus, I think the user interface would be difficult to operate since you have to look at something to select it and then do your crab claw pinchers to hit the button to switch to it, let's say, if it's a TD. I think he'd get into trouble if something distracts him on camera 3 is relocating and he looks over at it at the wrong moment. He could accidentally switch to it. I think it would be a very bad choice for switching live video.
Go, Jeffrey.
So first of all, it's 22 streams of ProRes 422 video, and you have to think of it kind of virtually. So it's not going to have 22 screens on your eyes as you go. If you start turning your head, all of a sudden there's going to be a screen here, there's going to be a screen here. We had a great conversation on this a couple days ago because it's all about the pixels. Now, keep in mind that an 8K video is 33.18 million pixels, whereas the screen on the Vision Pro is only 23 million pixels. And then you come into the whole idea of moving it away from your eyes. So instead of an 8K being right in front of you, it's actually going to be to the side and a little bit farther away. Are those going to be true pixels that you see? Because the true pixels are going to be right in front of your face. And that's one of the things that a lot of people are trying to really wrap their head around. So in the production room, the question will be, will you really need to see that 8K video truly? And if that's the case, then this is just not going to be it, because they're kind of making a virtual version of that and shrinking those 33 million pixels. So you could it actually sets up into your environment. So I don't think it's going to be great for production. Anybody that's doing any type of 8K rendering will probably go back and use a regular monitor.
The 8K doesn't matter. The 24. If you're talking about a 24-inch screen, let's just say in front of you, if you're going bigger, but a 24-inch screen can be 2K, you're probably going to be fine, just because of the distance that you're at from what you're looking at. So it's great that it can do 8K, but it doesn't really matter that it can do 8K because you could still put those all up at much lower resolution. It wouldn't have any effect on how you feel about what you're looking at there. And you might be able to then zoom it up. If it's 4K, you might, pull it up to see something. I don't think you're going to see it in the control room. I do think that there's a place where people might want a executive producer might want to throw the headset on at home and look at a bunch of stuff that's coming in, watch the screen in front of them. And this is where, for a long time, we had one screen that we could interact with. And so we had to put everything into that one screen. But now that we have multiple screens in spatial computing, we're going to put things around. We did a test for golf where we had a clean aperture. So if you think about it, we had we had a clean aperture here. And if you think about this as a, kind of a 360 space here, or a 180 space, we didn't really use 360. So we had that. And then over here, looking to the side was all the stats. So you had all the stats that were going down. So this is where the golf, the rankings, where they were, what they were doing. So you could look over anytime you wanted to get that. And then the second thing that happened is over here, going up the side here like this, was all social media and, your text messages and all kinds of other stuff. So you could sit in what felt like a theater and you had screens that were available to you as needed and you couldn't move them around. But with the Apple one, you'll be able to move them around. And so then you're watching this and there's no lower thirds. There's no, there's nothing else. This is all, in fact, we had it so that the lower thirds, would be down like under here like this. So when you looked at that clean aperture, you could see it. Now, the other thing that we did is that if you get to a certain hole where we have a 360 camera, all of this, all of this here would fade out and you would see a 360 shot. You go into what Apple would call the space. We didn't do this for Apple. But you would go into the space and suddenly you're standing on that hole watching, a golfer theoretically, try to get something in. And then when they were done with that experience, we would slowly fade back into those things. And I think that's what you're going to start to see is us rethinking, you're not stuck with a screen. And as we start to go down that path, I think you're going to end up with some really interesting solutions that are very different from what we thought. And I think after watching that golf demo that we threw together, it was like, I don't want to watch it any other way. And I think that as people start to and if Apple is going to have a hard time selling that because they have to show it to you. And, it's really useful that they spent $10 billion on basically owning all the broadcasts for MLS. So what you're probably going to see is solutions that are around sports events like that, where the user and potentially producers will get a heads up of all kinds of things that they may want, but we're not constrained anymore to a single rectilinear screen. And so I think that it's going to be a pretty interesting time when we start to play with that a little bit more. Next question.
Question comes in from Austin, Texas, and Paul Wallace. He says, ChatGPT versus Bing Chat versus Google Bard. Which is the best AI chatbot? Well,
go, John.
Certainly subjective, this answer, but first of all, ChatGPT and Bing are the same thing based on GPT-4. Google Bard is very good. I've been getting marginally better results off of Bard lately, but I always cross-reference the two. Yesterday, a company just got funded to the tune of $1.3 billion from Microsoft and from NVIDIA at a $4 billion valuation. It's called Inflection Pi. It's the best conversational chatbot I've ever seen in my life. Go play with it. It's a lot of fun.
And it's Inflection Pi?
Inflection AI is the name of the company.
Oh, Inflection
product is called Pi.
Got it. Next question.
Next one comes in from Douglas Carmichael. And he says, with the proliferation of internet protocol-based control and the flexibility that it brings, do you think we'll see GPI control with just a dumb contact closure go away?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I don't think you'll see it go away because there's certain aspects which it's direct and it doesn't fail, and you're not dependent on IP infrastructure for it to work. Of course, IP does offer you a lot more flexibility and multiple people to control something without having to connect to it, wired connection to it. But if you lose your internet connection or your router goes down, You could be out of business if you have everything is IP controlled. And has been proven with many home control lights that I have sitting around me right now. If I lose my router, I can't turn the lights on or turn them off. So that is a problem.
Yeah, I think there's a saying that says that to err is human, but to really screw things up requires a computer. And I think that we do have to be careful of how much we depend on that. I will say contact closures are pretty cool. We may call them dumb contact closures, but being able to have that level of control over something, we've done some great GPIO solutions that I think would be difficult. Be doable, but that's a protocol that still works between a bunch of pieces of hardware. I think that it would fade out very slowly if it fades out. I mean, there's somewhere in the future where we're all IP, but I don't think it's going to be anytime soon because having physical contact closures, especially as a backup, is pretty useful. Next question
comes in from Houston, Texas, and Peter Belbin. He says, has anyone done a side-by-side compare of the Insta360 Link with the new Ozbot Tiny 2? What are the strengths and weaknesses of each? And it seems like the Ozbot has OSC support out of the box via their desktop control app.
Go ahead, John.
Funny you say this. David Paskin this week posted in YouTube and on Facebook a 30-minute review of both those cameras. It's very comprehensive.
What did he say? What did David say?
I'm not telling.
We got to answer the question. Yeah. Go ahead, Tlaloc.
So Kyle Hammond did a little bit of a shootout in After Hours the other day, and I felt like it was hands down the Insta was better.
From an image quality perspective.
From an image quality, looking at a stop sign versus looking at a person. Like it was so red.
Right.
And it seemed like even after making an adjustment of color temperature and taking it off of auto, that stayed the same. So
yeah,
that's across the board on all the
Yeah, I have to admit that I haven't been that excited about the image quality of OBSBots. So while the feature set that the OBSBot has and the ability to do OSC has gotten me excited about the idea that we could use the OBSBots, I've never seen an OBSBot that I've liked the video coming out of it. So that's been I think that's the place for them. I think that's the place for them to grow. They're building great tools that are very flexible and controllable and so on and so forth. We also, that's why a lot of us are putting a lot of pressure on Insta360 to release an SDK. It sounds like they're not that far away from doing that. But we've been, again, to come back to it, that's why a lot of us are going up to GitHub and pushing our request of, hey, we would really like to have an SDK for the Insta360 link. You can get the link to that GitHub in Discord in the announcements that I put out yesterday. I'm going to keep on driving that home because we really want to get a lot of people there so that we can put some pressure on them and have them understand that we really need that to happen. Because we may still go to OBSBots at some point, but I agree with you that I haven't tested the latest one, but every one that I've tested, I haven't been that excited and I ended up sending it back. Next question.
Next one comes in from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. And Paul wants to know, how would you rank cross-platform password managers from best to worst? Would it be number 1, Bitwarden, number 2, 1Password, number 3, LastPass, number 4, Keychain, number 5, NordPass, and number 6, Other?
The most number of people that I know that are moving away from LastPass because of its security flaws are going to Bitwarden. So that's the one that most of us, most people I've talked to are going to. Go ahead, Courtney.
I would say none of the above. I just use the Chrome password manager that's built into Chrome for managing all the passwords that I use of websites, and Samsung has also a password manager that's built in, and it's based on biometrics because it uses my thumbprint lets me sign in with my thumbprint to all that. So it's much more secure, and I don't have to remember the passwords, and it's kept locally, so it's not shared with anybody. So I think that's secure, and I don't use any of the other password managers.
Next question.
Oh, that's me. Oh, sorry. Mike Beardmore from Bedford in the UK says, with Google dropping many products, is it time to abandon Android, Linux, and Windows and admit Apple ecosystem is the only OS to invest my limited dollars in? Oh my gosh.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah. No. It's that's the short answer. If Google's always played this game of picking up products, and then Yahoo did the same thing. They picked up a product, they played with it. It was like a kid with ADHD, played with it for a while and threw it in the bin.
We can see how well that worked for Yahoo.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. But the whole point is that Google also knows that they can throw it in the bin, but they can go back to that bin and grab it and use it for something else. And I think that's what's going on here. Plus the fact that in Windows architecture, in Linux architecture, in Android architecture, anybody can pick up the ball and start redeveloping something like this. All these programs that we're talking about really are not meaning of anything. So if, as long as things like the browser, like Facebook, like Twitter exist, most people are going to be fine with their Android phone. If they can take a picture, if they can take a video, they're fine with that. So I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. I am a little bit more concerned that if you put everything into one bin, which that would be the Apple bin, that if anything was to happen, then all of a sudden you'd be scrambling trying to figure out how to do what you need to do with another device.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I might remind you that Apple has orphaned more pieces of software and hardware than any of those other people that you're talking about. Every time they come up with a new operating system, a lot of times, that doesn't work with the latest, your software will be orphaned. So you have to deal with that. And also you're great inside that walled garden until they decide to seal up all the ports and cover them over because they looked ugly on all their laptops and you can't get anything in or out.
Go ahead, Tlaloc.
I think it's important to realize that Google is not Linux, and Google is not Windows, and so you just have to understand that these companies they have one thing in mind, and that is to make the most amount of money that they can possibly make, and you kind of have to follow along if you want to, and don't if you don't. I mean, it's just that simple.
Good, Chris.
I'm going to say it right here. Google's on the ropes. You might want to get out, sell your stock. And if you have any complaints about any of my predictions, you can email me at 734322@CompuServe.net.
I think that I have Android devices and some Windows machines and obviously a lot of Macs. I think that it's a challenge for Google that they cancel so many things of their own. So while Courtney's correct that Apple orphans a lot of software, it's usually other people's software as they move forward. And they usually give developers, the funny thing about Apple, I've been in a lot of WWDCs, and they'll broadcast it. They'll say, hey, we're going to twilight this in 3 years or 2 years or 1 year. And they'll kind of wind you down. And then they turn it off and all the developers are like, what happened? And they're like, well, we've been talking about this for a couple of years now. like this is how this is going to go. And the developers, don't want to put the effort into rewriting what they have. And Apple doesn't care, they're like, we're moving forward. And they usually give people a lot of warning. Like, just to be fair, like developers get it, but the hard part with Apple is that Apple says, hey, you really should use our libraries. And developers get into, well, I want to use my own library or I want to write it myself. And that's when the ones that get orphaned are generally people who wanted to do it their own way, because Apple will continue to update its own libraries, but very rarely, or make it easy to move from one library to another. But if you're writing something that's outside of what they build, then, that's not their problem. And so I think that's the challenge you get yourself into with Apple development. On the other side, Google's having a harder and harder time getting people to pick up their new developments because no one knows how long they're going to last. And so it went from, it used to be people would say, well, we're going to wait for 6 months. Let's just see what happens with Google for the next 6 months. I spent a lot of time, doing live events with Google. And so we got to watch this. And at the beginning, it was like they just wanted to let it sit for a little while and see what happens. Now it's hard to get people to think about it because they're like, oh, that'll be gone in 2 years, and so I think that has gotten much more difficult. There are definitely verticals in Google that don't have that problem. Like YouTube moves very, very slowly and very deliberately, and you tend not to, it's a Google entity, but you tend not to see it change direction very often. So it's not all of Google. It is specific areas of it. I think that the hardest part for Google and Windows and even Linux is fragmentation. Like, how do they deal with fragmentation? Because it's not something that Apple's that challenged with. Apple is getting more and more unified, and everyone else is getting more and more fragmented. And so that's difficult. The other thing that keeps a lot of people up at night on the other platforms is that 80% of kids under 18 are on an iPhone. And that's a lot of people talking about it. And it comes down to, it's a really high number, and everyone's worried about it because it is, and I talked to my kids about it because my kids are in that age range. And I said, so what's the deal? And I said, is the green bubble a big deal? And they're like, oh yeah, green bubbles. There's no joke. Like that, no one wants anybody with a green bubble on their chats. And so but that is that's kind of a wave that's slowly moving forward that everyone's worried about as far as how that goes. So I'm glad that all of those platforms exist. I'm glad there are things that I can only do with an Android device. There's things I can only do with a Windows device, and I'm glad that they're all there and they're useful. But I think that if I was going to when I develop software, I don't really consider the other platforms as an option. Next question.
Comes in from Peter Belkin in Houston, Texas, and he says regarding the Insta360 Link SDK support, wouldn't we rather have them add the ability to control the camera via OSC interface that their desktop control app should expose? Not saying not to have the SDK, but how many people are going to use that?
Taller.
I think this is a really good question. It's sort of a matter of thinking, okay, so do we trust that Insta360 would make an OSC API that had all of the right things for us to talk to? Or would we prefer that a production person or somebody like in this group build a little in-between program that can give us whatever we want in OSC so that because we are seeing everything from the SDK? It's probably a good question. I mean, I think maybe from their point of view, it might be better to do OSC because then there's more likelihood that they can kind of control how the thing is used, and maybe the support would be less problematic for them. But it's a good question.
Yeah, I think I would, if I was going to choose, I'd rather have them do an SDK that ties into everything in the camera, and then let someone build an OSC handler that interacts with that SDK. I think you end up with more flexibility. Exactly what Talak was touching on is that, do we really know that they'll understand OSC enough to give us everything that we need? I'd rather them give something that they've already done a lot of. So Insta360 has done SDKs for every other camera other than the Link. And so they know how to do SDKs. I would not want Insta360 to learn something new. Do what you do well, put it out there, and then someone will very quickly, with the Insta360 Link, someone's going to build an OSC handler very fast, if the SDK comes out. So I'd rather have someone who actually understands OSC, that cares about OSC, building the OSC interface for the SDK, as opposed to Insta360, which I don't think has ever done OSC before. That doesn't seem like a great solution. Next question.
Comes in from Douglas Carmichael. He says, I've been struggling with developing creative ideas in my electronic music, and one factor is plug-in sprawl. He says, over the years of collecting virtual instruments and effects, could curating my collection and making templates help rebuild my creativity?
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I think it could. A lot of times we collect all this stuff and we forget what those plugins sound like or what they do. And going through them and organizing them, or throwing out or comparing one versus another, and throwing out the one that you really don't ever use over the one that you favor most of the time, can help organize your thoughts and get things back into the foreground that you may have forgotten about. So yeah, it can help rebuild your creativity. You may hear a plugin going, oh yeah, I forgot about that I had that. I bought that 7 years ago and it's been sitting in distant folder for all that time. So going through and sorting through stuff, I find stimulates creativity, and it takes me back to listen to all those old vintage effects.
Go, Jeffrey.
You should see how many actual instruments I have sitting in this house right now that I don't use, and it just becomes if you start collecting a lot of things. I can see a couple guitars back there, the ukulele. I picked that up last week. My keyboards and everything like that. So that's the same thing. Is you got so much time in the day to do anything, then you just can't pick up every piece of every musical instrument and try and get an idea from there. The other problem is if you're checking, I would go through this list and make sure that they're still working or they're still sounding good. Because if you get a plugin that's like 10 years old, it might sound more digital than one of the more current versions of that plugin. And then you got to ask yourself, do I want to spend the money to update this plugin just to put it back in the, as you called it, the plugin sprawl right there? So I would go through, I would definitely go through and just play and take a day and go through each plugin you have. And then just play a couple things and see if that inspires you. And then just like, I guess it's with the, that Japanese feng shui artist that she does the thing on Netflix. It's like go through your closet, and if you haven't worn it in 30 days, put it in another area, and if you still haven't worn it in 30 days, get rid of it. I think the same thing you got to do here with these plugins.
The most important thing is to do something with it rather than fiddle. And I think that one of the things that I still do a lot of visually, and probably less with music, but sometimes with music, is I get something that I really enjoy and I play with how to make it sound like something else. So pick a heavy metal song and make it sound like reggae, or have something, and you don't have to do the whole song, just do a minute, do 30 seconds, do something that forces you to output something that you have to kind of refine and work on. I have to admit that my little thing, if I want to relax, is I take the Apple Ring, the little Mbira thing. I have the MIDI for that. And I play with building these like 1 minute crazy, like sometimes it's like EDM, sometimes it's whatever. And it's just a fun little thing to grab onto. And I don't have to think about it that much. I have a keyboard too, so I play with a couple things there. But for some reason, that one gets me back to, I just feel like hanging out for a half an hour. I'm not trying to produce any music. I'm just, but thinking that has become a little bit of my like wordle, is to play with that one little tone because it's really simple and well-formed. Go ahead, Courtney.
And one thing to keep in mind is some of these plugins are licensed. And I've run across things where, I license that, and you find out the licensing server that has to be online to unlock it every time you launch it has been offline for 4 years. And so now it's just dead meat. So going through and weeding out the stuff that the licenses have expired on and you don't need to renew them, is a good thing to help you weed through stuff and pare down your collection.
Next question.
From Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. He says, Tensor AI is an app from the team that made Dispo, a photo sharing app designed to mimic the spontaneity of disposable cameras. You can chat with AI likenesses. How will this play out? AI likenesses talking to AI likenesses?
Yeah. I don't know. I think that people are going to get saturated with things that are synthetic, and I think that you're going to have kind of a backlash of those types of things. So I think that it's going to be hard to get over that uncanny valley for people. I think that there's other places we might use it, but I think that there's times where we're going to want the real thing, and I think that's going to drive more towards that. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, we talked yesterday, I think, about handling telemarketers with some type of AI chatbot.
That I think is going to be amazing.
That'd be an application. But then we're going to end up with, the telemarketers are now going to incorporate AI marketers that are going to call you and pretend to be real people. I've already heard. But
then my AI will fight their AI.
So now we'll have these two AI
bots.
Chatbots just talking back and forth and tying up your phone line for the rest of the day.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris. Just one more. That's it. Okay.
I yield my time.
Go ahead, Tlaloc, real quick.
Oh, we're definitely in that future already. There was a big article that I read recently about how for years, they've been doing these very familiar, like, hey, how's it going, and telling dad jokes. It was all computer, and people spent millions of dollars on the scam. Like, we're already.
Like, go, Jeffrey.
And the one thing that you got to be concerned about is where your data is going, because this is a company called All Summer Long. I don't believe that they're based in the United States. And so your data is going out there. How are they collecting the data? How are they reusing the data? Because ultimately with these apps, it's, as we always say, you are the product in this situation. And they are building a database on what you put into that product.
Next question.
Comes in from Eduardo Augustine in Panama, Pennsylvania. He says, getting the SMTAV 30X optical 1080p PTZ camera, should I go for 4K to future-proof, or is it not a valid investment for live streaming right now? Here's a link.
Tlaloc?
So I think you should invest in the 4K. I mean, I think the thing about it is that you might be using it to live stream, but it's a PTZ camera, so you might also be using it for something else. And if you're using it for something else, you might want to make 9:16 aspect ratio, and when you do that, you're just cutting pixels away. So get as many pixels on tape. I know that's skeuomorphic, but get as many pixels there as you possibly can, so that when you have to cut them away to do other things with them, you've got more.
Yeah, with the link here, it looks like it's linking to something that's 1080p as far as that goes, and it's a 1/3 inch chip, so it's not going to have very much depth of field. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
It's also it's regular PTZ camera. I mean, you can do SDI, you can do HDMI on it. You can connect it up to a RS-232. And it says it does NDI as well. So you have a lot of different options. I don't think 1080p is going to go away anytime soon, especially when you're talking about going to YouTube or Twitch or anything like that. If you want to call up a really quick behind the scenes camera, even if you go all 4K, this is a perfect behind the scenes type camera that you can utilize, and you can control, put it up in the rafters and control, move around. It could even become a security camera. So I think there's a lot of good use for that. Future proofing, 4K PTZ cameras, they're fairly expensive nowadays. They're starting to drop in price. So I would still give it about a year to get it in a price range that actually works.
Go ahead, Chris.
Eduardo, about 40 years ago, I worked in a store and I saw a product and I thought, you know what? I won't go into the details. I'm going to need that one day, and I bought it. And it wasn't inexpensive. I never used it. I would recommend buy what you need, when you need it, save the money.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep underlining, because I have the luxury of data of how long people watch things oftentimes that are done, in the back of rooms and hybrid events and everything else. The watch time and the dwell time and the attention time is very low. It's a really brutal, the numbers are really brutal. And so I just, I know that a lot of people think about this, like, I can put it in the back of my church and I can put it in the back of my, and put it in the conference room. What people are doing when you do that is largely doing something else on their computer screen. That's the data that we had, and that's 15 years old data. It's not new data. It is when you are just putting a screen back there, people aren't watching. And so I think that you just want to keep that in mind when we think about all these PTZ cameras in the back of rooms and so on and so forth. And I did hundreds, possibly low thousands of events this way. And I'm just telling you that I don't think it's effective. Like I don't think you get a lot out of it. So you just want to kind of think through that. Next question.
Comes in from Chris Widener in Lafayette. I guess that's Louisiana. It says, what are you doing for location-based social media traffic drivers? He has a nonprofit that wants to advertise to everyone that stops to see a display set up in a park. Probably Facebook, yes.
QR codes are pretty useful. So that's, so you want to think about a QR code that's going to send someone somewhere. to make that actually happen. I don't know if there's a lot of social media that is that effective. I think there's a growing, dislike for, a lot of people just aren't using Facebook the way that they used to. Definitely, if you're looking for a younger audience, you're not going to see a lot of interaction. I don't know any of my kids' friends that are on Facebook at this point. So I think that those are, those can be challenging. Snap is popular. So that seems to be the one that a lot of kids are on because their parents don't understand it. I don't understand it. But there's a growing number of kids also that are just not doing social media. I talked to my daughter and she's like, people can text me. And I don't need. She's and she's like, they have to come and ask. I don't want to make it easier. So I think that there's actually we're starting to see a growing number of people at a certain age group that are actually opting out of social altogether. So I think that that's another thing to kind of keep in mind of watching that trend. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, as Alex said, a QR code if you want to drive people to your specific site. I would putting a public kiosk up and exposing it to unmoderated social media feeds or streams.
Well, I don't think
dangerous.
he said a public kiosk. I think he just said a display set up in a screen. I don't know.
A park.
But it's just
sounds like
a display. I guess I would say a display is I don't know. I don't know if he meant.
Oh, maybe he wasn't talking about a digital display. Maybe he was just talking about a sign or something. But
yeah.
I would be careful about if you were talking about a kiosk or something with a digital display, be careful about putting anything up unmoderated because people will game it then just to destroy it.
Good, Chris.
I think it'd be super interesting, Alex, if we did a series of shows, maybe, like one Monday a month or something like that, where we take the various social media platforms, Snap, Insta, FaceBase, whatever, MySpace, and we tear them apart, and not criticize them, but we break them in. Bring somebody on who really does love Snapchat. My family loves Snapchat. That's their instant messenger. They use that over FaceTime to talk to people live, face to face. Weird, but it'd be interesting to kind of bring on an expert to explain the pros and cons and ins and outs and benefits of those various platforms so that we don't have to say, I don't understand that.
I think it'd be good to break it down. It'd be a good Monday subject, to kind of look at social media and where it's at and what people are using and how they're using it. I think it's probably something we have to check that temperature almost once a quarter to just see or once a year or once every 6 months of like, where is social media and what are people using and what are some good, processes in that. So I think that's a really good idea. I'll give you a business idea that I had many, many years ago, which is that I always wanted to have a place where you could take pictures. It would be a kiosk that would take pictures like at the Grand Canyon and then print a postcard of you and your family, but it would print a real postcard out for you. This was long before social media. I think now you could still do those printers at parks and so on and so forth. You take a picture with your phone, you wirelessly connect it to it, and it prints a real postcard that you can send to people that feels thick and does all the things. And there's your business model for the morning. Next question.
Sorry, mouse failure. Next question comes in from Robert Shoji in Los Angeles, who says, Courtney, yes, how was the SMPTE meeting event last night?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, it was, for those that you missed, we were talking about was the HBO camera assessment series for 2023 was screened last night at the Linwood Dunn Theater. And it was a room packed full of cinematographers. If you dropped a bomb there, we probably couldn't produce anything for television for the next 3 or 4 years. It was interesting. It was long, 96 minutes long. It looked great. And just quick conclusions from the cameras that were compared, which consisted, I'll just briefly list off the cameras, the Arri Alexa, there was the Blackmagic Ursa Mini 12K, there was the Red 5 Monstro. Anyway, I can't remember what their other superlative was on that. There was the Alexa 35, which is their new 35, Super 35 sensor camera. And there was the Venice 2 from Sony Venice 2, and Kodak, good old Kodak 35 millimeter film 5219 in comparison. They spent millions of dollars on this, I'm guessing, they built giant sets like Wes Anderson cutaway sets, 2-story set with actors in each of the rooms, moving back and forth between each of the rooms. Each of the rooms lit differently. One is daylight, one is nighttime with TV viewing, one is an attic with light streaming through a window. And then they compared over, 4 stops over, 4 stops under, at 1 stop intervals for each of these cameras. So it gets fairly tedious to keep track of all this stuff and look at it. But one thing I came out noticing is that most of those cameras were probably interchangeable. They did a really good job of matching the cameras one to the other. And although they did use a fixed LUT for both of them, they weren't doing scene-to-scene correction with it. One thing was very obvious, though, is 35 millimeter is not a choice anymore because every time the 35 millimeter clip came up, it was like, now here's stuff we shot by moonlight. It was just black.
The digital is finally passed.
Can I make out a shape there? I don't think so. Yeah, so it and the grain size when they overexposed and underexposed and brought things back to the usable visual range, it just became flying ping pong balls. Yeah. So that's my assessment. Unfortunately, I don't think this is anywhere where you can download or stream it. They have showed it. They did show it at Cinegear. And because it's 96 minutes long, it takes a long time to wade through it. You should take notes because you will forget. By the time you see the same thing over and over again for each camera, you forget which camera looked better than which camera by the time they get to the 6th different lighting setup, et cetera.
Interesting. Maybe we should see if we can get it up in the North Bay at a theater near us. Last question for the first hour.
Comes in from Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia. He says, regarding QR codes, do you have a preferred generator? I'm always surprised that when you point your camera to a QR code, the preview has some unknown vendor like QR code who could insert a math code.
100%. Never use an online tool to do this. Never use an online tool to build a QR code. Never ever use an online tool. I use QR Factory on the Mac, but there are other standalone ones that are there. And so QR Factory is a standalone Mac app that listens to me when I send them complaints. There's a lot of they're very responsive, and I highly recommend it if you're on the Mac. There's PC ones. There's also like literally scripts that you can write that will do that in the OS. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, but never use an online. Don't ever develop your QR codes online. Always do them on home. You don't know what's going into that QR code. So definitely don't do that. So I've done it. The reason I'm telling you not to do it is because it was a big mistake. Because then what'll happen is they'll be like, "Hey, you're not paying for it. We're gonna reroute all the things that you had there to something else." Because they want you on a subscription model and everything else. But even if it's free, do not trust. Don't do that. Yeah. Next. Okay. That's all I got. I wanted to answer that question because it's really important. Because I really
never
pay
is
the
what
price.
you're saying.
Say never, ever, never, never, ever, never.
Draw your own QR codes with a pen and paper.
Exactly. You'll learn what the code means, and you'll just be able to draw it. All right, we're jumping into our second hour, and we're really excited to have Tlaloc here to talk to us a little bit about DMX. If you've got questions about DMX, go ahead and throw those questions in as we start to talk. We're really excited. I think that DMX is a very important subject. A lot of us are trying to get our heads around it as we add controls to not just our lighting, but just a lot of other devices. And so anyway, so we're really excited to have this. Tlaloc, can you give us a little bit of an overview?
Yeah. So, DMX is something that has been around and standardized since about 1990. And a lot of people say, well, why are we still using it? Because it's old and kind of antiquated. But the truth of the matter is that it allows us to continue to use dimmers and fixtures and functions for 20, 25 years. And that's really, really important in the theater industry. I realize that not many people here are theater people, but that is, it would be deadly if we weren't able to go into a venue and utilize some of the equipment that they have. It would kill the process. So it keeps things going. It keeps things working. But what is it? It is a way in which to associate levels with a particular address. And it started out that you're taking a signal out of a lighting console and you're sending essentially frames like we do in video, right? A frame with 512 addresses that then each one of those 512 addresses has a level associated to it. So,
and what's the range of that level? So you have 512. So one universe is 512. Is that right?
Yeah.
So that's what you call that. I mean, that grouping of
one universe is 512, and it was not called a universe until we
ran out of 512. Like it was like it's just what you had, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was just 512. Like you never went beyond that, right? And so then what's the number of variables for each one of those addresses? Is it 255? Oh, 255. Well, 256 was 0, right?
Yeah. So
it's 8-bit. And the reason for that is that literally when we're sending this signal across these wires, you have a time location for each 512 addresses, and then a tiny time location for each 8 bits right after that. And so timing is everything. You have this start of the frame. It's just like video, but it's very much simpler version of video.
Right.
Where you have a blanking frame, and then you have each channel. And
it's sending this constantly, right? It's not something that is like it sends it when it needs it. It's just there's 512 addresses getting a value.
Yes.
Through the system all the time, right? So it just sends 512, and if you're not using it, it's 0 or at whatever it was.
Yeah, it'll send 0, it'll send 0, it'll send 0. Like if you had nothing on, it'll just send 512 addresses at 0 every time.
And
now, the way that it does that is by eight peaks inside of that timing that essentially make that 8-bit 8-bit. That's 255.
So it's just like it's on or off across those eight electrical peaks. It's
exactly
in that timing. I got it. So there's these. Yeah, go ahead.
There's these chips, DMX chips, that you'll find in every one of these devices. If you ever everything about this thing works, but I can't control it. Open it up and see if there's a little square chip that has fallen out, because they literally fall off their inserts.
Right.
Drop it back in and the thing will start working again, because that math is being done inside of that chip. And
now when it sends out those 8 peaks, so is it sending out 512 packages of 8 all right after each other? So it's just like super fast.
It's one frame. It's thought of as one frame. Yeah. So yes, I mean it's like frame start, which is a particular blanking voltage, or not voltage, but time,
right.
And then alt 512, and it just repeats itself. Dot, 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 dot.
Right.
So when we started to get into the fact that we have networking, then we needed a protocol that we could send this same information across a network packet, right? To do it in the same way. And so it essentially is taking a single packet and repeating it like a frame, instead of doing it with voltage across a cable. Right. And there's 2 protocols for that. One of them is called ArtNet, and the other one is called SACN, and they're just slightly different in the way that they are built. A lot of SACN is utilized in your in your bigger systems. SACN is used because it connects up really easily without having any kind of configuration to it. It just kind of outputs multicast. And but a lot of the types of what we call DMX gateways that we're going to use in this group are actually ArtNet. Or they're ArtNet.
And this is taking, basically every frame is 4 kilobits, right? Like 4096. That's the bits, right, that are going out, I think. So it's not very much data. Like when we think
It's
about
not very much data. Yeah.
It's like 49. I think it's 4 kilobits per frame is what's going to go out, and then those get converted back to those electrical signals, which are 4,096 pulses
Exactly.
that happen very, very fast, that are going out. And any given device, it's not like one device is a single one of those 512s, right? Every device has its own, like there's RGB, there's brightness, there's a bunch of other things. So a given device, how many signals might a device need to be controlled?
Well, I was just looking at the Eurovision show that's going on right now for 2023, and they're using, I think, Roby Fortes, and those have 52 attributes to them.
Right. So just one light is 52 of the 512. So you have 10 lights, and that's one whole universe, right?
Yes. So that's one whole universe. So if you have there are, I think, 600 Roby Fortes in the Eurovision show. So
that's a lot of universes.
And then they have a whole bunch of LED tape, and they have a bunch of that they're pixel-wise controlling. So the stat is that there's 17,500, I believe, attributes, but it may just, what they said in the article was light sources in that show, which is mind blowing.
And so that means like if you have a tape of LEDs, that could theoretically, if you can change the color and the brightness of those LEDs, that means that it's like 4, like it'd be like it could potentially be 4 or even 8 addresses per LED, right?
Correct. And so you have to take, like, if you have, a lot of times we'll have the big, there's these LED curtains, and we'll want pixel-wise control of those. You might have 6 or 7 universes just on that, right? And it fills up really quickly. And this is how these large consoles work with money. Like they're expensive because they can output that kind of universe.
Because like and basically you have so they're integrating all those universes. So you could have an ETC console with 8 universes or 20 universes or whatever, and it is organizing all of those. Is that right?
Yeah, it's organizing it, and it's sending, and I can go in a little bit to some of that, how it works on an ETC console, for example.
Yeah.
But what you got to think about is it's a lot of number managing, right? Because you have what we call a fixture number, and a fixture number is what a lighting designer wants to call it. Like fixture 1 is the most important fixture, and I'm not going to call it address 369 and ask for address 369. I'm going to call it what I want to call it, which is 1, right?
Right.
And so that's where patch comes in. And here, let me share my screen real quick. And so if I call up fixture 1, what you notice is that there's a lot of attributes available there, right? You've got intensity, you've got pan and tilt.
Pan and tilt is more than one attribute, right? Like the pan and tilt is going to give it. Yeah. Like when you're moving that pan and tilt around, you're doing it graphically, but that's a bunch of channels to tell it to get it to where it needs to go.
It can be up to it can be a couple of channels like speed, but really in its simplest form, it's 2 channels, right? It's 0 through 255 in pan and tilt. Right. And what you see here is X focus, Y focus. Those are actually virtual. So the console can build virtual handles that allow you to do things that are not sending, that are combining. It's like on an RC control, remote control. You combine things so that 2 channels are moving at the same time. And each one of these things, the color you have, in this case, you have CYM mixing, cyan, magenta, yellow mixing. You have different colors you can call up. Everything's on a stepper motor and a moving light, right? So you're sending a command to a stepper motor that moves it along that axis of where 0 to 255, and it keeps going, right? You got all these other attributes.
And again, one of the things that the ETC, as you were talking about, just to really underline it, it has raw data that it's sending out to that it has to figure out, but you're able to build essentially a macro or abstract that away. So you can have one dial that's going to move it's going to send out a whole bunch of commands to potentially a lot of different lights, or even to one light. I just wanted to move the light somewhere. Like when you saw that little graphic, I'm moving pan and tilt.
Yeah.
It's figuring out what it needs to do to execute that, and you don't have to do it explicitly.
Yeah. So like here, I will show you that we have, I'm going to get my moving light controls. So we have this light, it's on at full. Now it's on, you can see I'm actually visualizing this light, right? So, and I can pan and tilt this around like so, and I'm going to point it at us. And I'm doing that by just moving the pan and tilt functionality. And that's exactly what would happen in the air. You know, the light would do what that is. And so, but okay, let's say you've just got a panel that is lighting you up in your office and you want control of that. Well, the thing about it is that too might have more than one attribute, because you're going to have a warm LED engine and a cool LED engine so that you can move back and forth between a higher and a lower color temperature, and get what you want to do for your imagery. So still you're looking at a fixture number. Like let's say my Astra is in front of me and I want fixture number 1 to be my key light. And when I click on that, I'm going to get those different handles into that color temperature. The reason I'm bringing this up is because this is one of the first things that people kind of misunderstand about how this all works. Like they want to think about it like the old dimmers where it's 1-to-1. Like I want a handle for blue and I want a handle for yellow, which you can do that. But you have to build it differently. And it is a little bit, it ties your hands to work that way. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is that when we start getting into ArtNet and SACN, you can do, I'll stop sharing for a second. You can do a lot of more, you can do more things. You can start to say, okay, well, I would like to build something on an Arduino. And I can take the ArtNet library and load it onto the Arduino, and it can see those packets coming in on Ethernet or on Wi-Fi, and it can give us output voltage on our PWM, on our I/O, on our Arduino, and you can build candles and you can build all kinds of things. Can you
say what PWM is? Define it for everybody.
Pulse width modulation. And what that does is it takes the voltage that you have on your Arduino, which is usually, I think it's usually 5 volts, but you can also up and down that. But it cuts it up in an incredibly fast way so that it can dim and brighten, an LED coming off of that, or even a non-LED. Like sometimes I made candles out of little grain of wheat lights, which are actually little incandescent lights, but you run into power management issues.
And is it an Arduino for every one of those lights, or is it do you have it like controlling a lot of lights?
So what I did was I took one of the RS32 modules, which is the Arduino infrastructure, but with a Wi-Fi backpack or Wi-Fi on it, and I put all that ArtNet into it and then I took 5 grain of wheats and I put it into a epoxy mold that looked like a flame, and then put epoxy in there, and then you can flicker between those little grain of wheats and make it look much more realistic when it comes to fire.
That's cool.
So there's that, and then the other thing we wanted to touch on, and I'm kind of doing this quick overview so that maybe it'll knock questions loose for the viewers.
Right.
The other thing you can do is you can send DMX into the virtual world. So Unreal Engine has some plugins that allow you to literally take fixtures.
And you can download a theater. There's a theater model in Marketplace that's like $30 or something like that. And you download it, and it's the stage, and it comes with lights, and the lights are already pre-wired for DMX.
Yeah. And my only complaint
Yeah.
is that I wish that they were exactly like the real lights.
Oh, yeah.
And which I think that somebody's probably working on that, or maybe they already have and I haven't found it yet. But if I can take a situation and do a virtual background, and I have a set of Roby Fortes like we're talking about from Eurovision, and I can also have those Roby Fortes that have all the same attributes and all the same optical properties in my virtual world as I do in my real world, then I'm going to be a lot happier as a designer to be able to, match those and make those do something that combine in a similar way.
And
so
there's the power there is like one of the things that Tlaloc and I worked on was having a situation where we had a physical person on a stage in front of a green screen getting lighting, and there was a virtual background behind them that was being controlled by DMX, and a venue that people could watch this that had its own lighting, and all of them are in the same. They're all getting DMX controls so that you could integrate a physical foreground with a virtual background with the venue itself, and that could be done over the internet. So it's not. It is and you could theoretically have 40 of those venues that are getting the same commands that are all tied into the Unreal Engine, which is tied into the physical experience, and so you could really create something that is very, very scalable with that. It's pretty exciting.
In regards to latency, that there has to be compute that happens. So I think what I would do as a designer is I would build into my cues the idea that maybe, there's a wave coming in real lights, and then they end up, a slight adjustment in that same wave coming from. So you're getting the sense of where you are, or in the video, or
and you literally in that sense you start getting to time where you you have to calculate for every venue that you could be talking to. You calculating the latency to each venue so that everything reaches there at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Time is everything. I mean, here's the thing: different fixtures have different stepper motor speeds.
Right.
And different features in there, even in their firmware, that protect themselves from breaking apart because they're moving too fast. And I ran into this once. I was doing a show and I wanted a really, really sharp blackout. I wanted everything to turn off right at the same time. And the thing about it is your incandescent lights take a second to turn off. There's this fade out, right, that happens. Right. So I built a whole thing that was mostly arc lights with a stepper motor and a fader on it, and they weren't closing fast enough. So I started looking up and contacted the company, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we made something for Natasha Katz on Broadway. We'll send you a piece of firmware that'll speed that up. But be aware, you're probably gonna have to glue the glass back on the stepper motor every night because it moves so fast." And so
that's funny.
And so they sent me this thing, and I put it up there, and I did that blackout, and it was like, and it was perfect. But every second night or so, we had to go up and re-glue that glass.
That's amazing. Courtney, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I had one question. For DMX 512 signaling is unidirectional, packet-based, but can you use it for triggering things because of that has no error correction? Other than maybe if you send it over IP, over HTTP, convert it to that, it does. But can you use it for triggering pyro or lasers or something that could affect someone's health other than lighting or stage movement of stage pieces, chain winches, etc.? Can you use it for controlling those kind of things?
That's a really good question. It's been in the sort of general knowledge of things to never use DMX as a in a life and death safety situation for that very reason. And so what we kind of do is we say, okay, is this, it may be stage automation, but if it's not going to affect life, then we can still use it with that. But for the most part, we just don't, error correction. Yes, there is some error correction, but not the kind you're talking about, Courtney, but I do want to bring it up really quickly. The actual DMX cable is an interference error correction, right? So it has both the positive and negative of those signals, and the chip is looking at the difference and trying to make sure that it's not doing something from a standpoint of interference. And so then the other error correction that exists, or the bidirectional side that corrects, is a thing called RDM. And RDM is essentially a packet going the other way, and it'll give you information about the light, and whether or not you have a burnout or there's a problem, or you can kind of do a little more work.
Is that carried on a separate pair of wires, or is that
same wire,
multiplexed down the same one?
Yeah.
Does that happen in both a 3-pin and 5-pin?
That happens. Very good question. That actually happens in. Yeah, I believe it does happen in both. Okay. I believe it does happen in both, but it I think it's a broken system. I turn it off because it makes so many things behave wrongly.
It's chatty.
Yeah. So I often turn it off, but I think it's getting better. There's going to be a moment in time when there's enough things that get thrown away from, the early 2000s that it won't be an issue anymore. But
how old is DMX?
1990.
Wow. And then before that, was just like people moving things up and down.
Before that, it was AMX. So, and then before that, it was direct dimming. So AMX is a 0 to 10 volt DC line that is analog data. So you're sending 0 to 10 volts and saying, this is where I want my 120.
Now, theoretically, like many things, AMX might have more resolution in some ways, right? Because it's analog.
But it is a total pain because they did it. It was parallel.
Right.
So you had to send a lot more cables.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it varies. DC voltage varies on the length of cable you're sending it to, too. So the value was hard.
Yeah. And there's a company called Doug Fleener.
Yeah.
Who's amazing. Like anything that worked poorly because it was 20 years old and you needed to make an adapter, he made that adapter. Like, I'll just go get the Doug Fleener box.
Is Doug Fleener still around?
He's still around. Yeah.
Get him on the show before that.
Now he's so cool.
Awesome. Let's jump into the questions. First
question.
Great.
All right. First one in comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. He says, can you recommend a small portable DMX lighting kit to support panel discussions on a small stage, 3 to 4 people?
Go, Talik.
Yeah, I think if you get something like the Astras, get some actual panel lights that have some color adjustment. I would say maybe 10 of those, and which is nice and soft, and you can even diffuse it further. And then I would simply get an NTEC DMX gateway or a DMX King. There's always questions about whether or not to do USB only or to do Ethernet. I would always err on the side of Ethernet, and I would always err on the side of PoE, because you're going to use that in different places, in different situations, and not right next to your computer. And so you can take that gateway and you can put it right on the pipe, right next to the light, and then you don't have to deal with as much DMX cable. And you can just run Ethernet right to it. And I work at a theater regularly that at every corner, it's a grid style, catwalk style, and at every corner is another gateway for just those little 8x8 squares.
Would you ever put a gateway? Theoretically, going to be expensive, but you put one on every light, right? I mean, just every single light.
Yeah, and that's starting to happen. So some lights have Ethernet connection points, and there's a super annoying and a super great part of this. The newer and more expensive lights actually have a gateway right on board, so you can just drop it right in and tell it what universe it's going to use, and you're done. The bad part is that some lights have an Ethernet cable instead of a DMX plug, but they don't have a gateway on board. So what they want you to do is adapt to DMX, which just makes no sense. Right. So anyway.
Next question.
This one comes in from Matt Parker in Sarasota, Florida. He says, when buying a USB to DMX interface, what should we look for to have it supported in a wide variety of software packages?
Coach Pollock.
Overall, all the USB interfaces work for all of the different software.
And do you want to use USB or do you want to use Ethernet?
You want to use Ethernet. Yeah, this is sort of what I was just talking about. I would highly recommend using Ethernet because
I mean the one advantage of USB is it's connected to your computer. Like if you're in my room and I've got some DMX lights here that I'm fiddling with, the USB might make sense because it's right there. But as soon as you're going any distance, USB gets really useless after about 15 feet.
Yep, it does. And if you've already got a network set up in your house and you're not adding one more thing to a computer's I/O, it's just part of the system, and I recommend it.
And my obsession right now is getting, my family does lip sync nights, and I can tell you DMX lighting connected to stuff, the best, especially for a smoke machine. All right, next question.
Coming in from Brian Osterhout in Modesto, California. He says, what software do you recommend to emulate DMX lights so you can program shows without setting up the actual lights?
Go ahead, Pollock.
The first place to start, it's absolutely free until you need to actually output with it, but is ETC to start with, to kind of get a sense of that. That's what I was showing you a second ago, and they have a service associated with it called Augment Reality, and you can patch your lights and then place them in space and turn them on and make them see what they do, and you can turn down the ambient light, you can add haze to the air, and it's all in one, sort of really, really great. And then you can get better from there. You can go to Vectorworks Vision or Nemetschek Vision, which allows you to do what you see is what you get, and patch an entire show and build it on your three-dimensional drafting of the space and of the set that you've got. You can go into Unreal. You can do what you see is what you get there. There are other what you see is what you get WYSIWYG options all over. They sort of have been adjusting over the years. That we've had. There was a company called WYSIWYG that did this, and it's been around for 20 years. Well, not 20, for 15 years. And so this is something that people do, and it is. There's just a lot more. There's a bunch of options now, especially when you come into Unreal.
Next question.
John Foltz in Seelings Grove, Pennsylvania says, how do you change over from an ETC grid where DMX signals adjust AC voltage for dimming to newer fixtures with constant AC, and dimming is handled in the fixture with DMX control?
Go ahead, Swallow.
So I want to, first of all, just say an ETC grid is kind of a misnomer, because ETC has a bunch of intelligent lighting. It has moving lights. It bought high-end systems, so a bunch of moving lights are under their capacity. So not just an ETC grid, but I think what you're talking about is a dimmed system. You have like ETC sensor racks, which you'll have 96 or 12 or 24 dimmers. They'll be in another room, and you'll have DMX going to those dimmers, and you'll be able to bring up any one of those dimmers and then turn on and off incandescent lights or whatever else you're trying to do. And and so the main consideration, there's a couple main considerations. One is have enough universes in your system when you start to move over to intelligent lights. Because if you have 96 dimmers in your theater and you're moving over to 96, just for simple thought process here, 96 intelligent lights, you've immediately gone to a lot more addresses. So you need to have enough universes to be able to run that in your control system. And when you purchase, like for example, if you purchase a Nomad, which is a key, a dongle key for the ETC system you can use on your computer, it starts out with 2 universes. And so if you upgrade it, it'll go to 12. So things will be, you'll need to just make sure you don't run into that problem. And then the other thing is getting hot power to to all of these lights that have constant power, and you do not want to plug a dimmed circuit into your essentially robot light, because it's bad. It's really bad for the power supplies, and it will not. It just won't last, and they'll act weird. I've noticed. So what the nice way to do it is to take those sensor racks have modules for each one of for 2-pack of a dimmer, and they have DMX controlled relays that you can just slot in, and then that circuit becomes a hot power safe for your intelligent lighting.
Next question
comes in from Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia. He says, do you actually use real DMX cables? Audio XLR cables seem to work okay for our small use, but am I tempting fate?
Go ahead, Lalo.
You're probably not tempting fate. The problem is that the impedance is slightly different. And so you're pushing, if you end up adding more lights, because it really has to do with voltage, as always, right? So if you're adding more lights to your system, and you have a higher impedance in that system, then at the time when you add that one extra light that is going to be super important for your situation is when you'll start to see failure. You'll start to see flickering. Because what happens is the timing with that extra impedance, the timing starts to go off. As we were talking about before, it's all about time in that frame. And so if you start to go off that time, then you're going to have different levels for different. The level of channel 1 is going to show up on channel 2, if that makes sense. And so, and then the other thing that I will bring up is if you are going to use the wrong impedance, then definitely use what's called a terminator at the end of your line. And that's just a little pull-up resistor that then brings those voltages back up into the right level.
Next question.
From Mike Beardmore in Bedford, UK, says, what is the best role for hardware such as Raspberry Pis in interfacing and controlling DMX devices?
Go, Todd.
So I think you could probably, I don't know if you can run any lighting control software on Linux, but you probably could. You might be able to run it as an actual light board. But because Raspberry Pi also has I/O, you could build things that do things like, a bunch of fireflies in a set, or you can build all kinds of pull the voltage out of there, and you got to do your diagram, your wiring diagram, so you're not blowing anything up, but going to different LEDs and to do different work in that way, and then you can connect it to the DMX. I do this sort of thing, and I mentioned it before with Arduino along the same lines, because it's got I/O, and you can go online and you can find the ArtNet library and load it onto that machine, and and then you can patch it. So you can say, okay, I want my starting address. It's universe 6. Let's say I want my starting address to be 7, and I have 4 outputs. So now it's going to be 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I can control it.
Next question.
This one comes from Morgan Price in Vancouver, British Columbia. It says, my Aputure lights have a USBC DMX. What do we connect to those, and how does that scale from 4 to 8 lights to larger with USB?
There you go, Tlaloc.
Wow, this is new. This is new for me. I have no idea what you would do with USB-C to DMX. That doesn't quite make sense. I don't know if it's actually sending ArtNet or SACN across that USB from your computer. I'm not sure. It may be that it's proprietary. It's quite odd to me.
Interesting. We'll have to do some more research in that area. Next question.
Matt Parker in Sarasota, Florida asked, how does ArtNet relate to DMX?
Go ahead, Lalo.
So ArtNet is essentially an IP version of the packets, the frames that I was talking about on the wire, and it's literally sending a packet with all those 512 addresses, and then right next to the address is a value of 0 to 1 of 255. and it really opened up the world for us a lot, ArtNet and SACN, to be able to get away from these systems with hundreds of wires and trying to get, it just allows you to do a line to a gateway and a star out, or a daisy chain out.
Is it theoretically it gets more stable over distance too as well, because it's purely digital. So if you're running from the back of a venue to the front of the stage, you don't want to use analog cables. You want to use ArtNet to get to there. Go 1,000 feet or 500 feet or whatever, and then you only get a lot more distance that way. Mile.
Yeah, I mean, you run into distance limitations even on network cable, as we all know. But like you could have,
but it can go through a switch, right? It can go.
Yeah,
you can
exactly.
go through a switch halfway there, or go ahead.
Right, and that's the key. There's another thing that was utilized for a long time called an opto coupler. And it was essentially it was for DMX, and you would send. It was exactly what a switch does for Ethernet. You'd send your DMX into it, and it would isolate via an optical device. It would isolate those signals, repower them, and then the thing that helps with, because I will tell you the thing that is the kryptonite for DMX chips, those little square ones I was talking about before, lightning.
They don't like that. They don't like that at all. There's a lot of things that don't like lightning, but what you're saying is they are specifically sensitive to it.
Yeah, exactly. So those help a lot. But I think I'm seeing more and more this idea of you go up into the catwalks, and every little section in the catwalks has its own gateway, and you can decide. Your universe schema, like in this particular theater, you have all the north-south bays are on one universe, and then each line of those is on a separate universe, and so that schema is utilized for the whole place, and the electricians know it, and the data is easy to track.
Now there's different ones. There's Chevet has their own. That's probably the least expensive gateway. There's NTech. There's DMX King. Are there any significant differences between those gateways?
Yeah, I mean, it can sort of creep into the cry once, buy once. If you buy once, cry once. If you buy one that's really inexpensive, what starts to happen is that the timing starts to be weird, and so you have to then turn down the timing on your console to that particular gateway, because it's too fast, and you'll see flickers, or you'll see odd things happening. So you have to tune that a little bit.
Do you have a favorite?
I really love a system with a bunch of ETC gateways, because the ETC gateways, you can just you go outside of the lighting console, and there's this thing called Concert, and you can just see every one of your gateways in a big grid, and you can change the universe and say, okay, I ran out of channels here, so I'm gonna, and each one of those can output a different universe on their two outputs, and so they're super powerful.
And they're much more expensive than the other ones. So that gets back to the buy one, cry ones. They're like 3 times as much as the NTECs, which are twice as much as the Chevets. But you get what you pay for. So if you have a show that you really want it to work, I mean, fiddling in my house, I think I have a couple DMX Kings and a NTEC, and that's probably fine. But yeah, when it has to work, when failure is more expensive than the box, that's when
exactly
that's the thing. Yeah. Next question.
The next question comes from Joe Phillips in Murphy, North Carolina. He says, how many DMX 8-bit commands per second are transmitted, and is that fixed or is it variable?
I would tell you, but I'd be lying the actual number. But I know it is variable. You have like slow, fast, and extra fast, and it has to be fast enough to not be noticeable when you're doing, think about it this way. You want an entire range of 700 lights to turn off at the same time. So you can't, it has to be fast enough that there's not a noticeable delay to the eye from the actuation. And also think about it this other way. So in opera, we do a lot of really, really, really slow fades. And this is where 8-bit dimming becomes a huge problem, because you're moving from 255 to 256 in the course of a minute. I mean, that's a little extreme, but you're going to see that hit. It's going to go right. And so because they didn't update how DMX works, they did sort of fake 16-bit dimming, which is essentially giving a second channel to those dimmers, and there's 255 steps between each one of the first ones. And so the computer is the console is essentially doing that ramp between each one of those other fades. And I can tell you that it is one of my huge pet peeves is having an 8-bit unit and trying to do a big long fade and seeing it going. Do we see 16-bit in the future anywhere? Or do we have to move away from I hope so.
Analog, right? We'd have to move to all Ethernet at that point. You could do, I mean, once you went Ethernet to the lights, you could theoretically do even higher bits.
I mean, it's like float. If you added float to it, it would help a lot, but it's just not that way. So, and so for example, and the other side of that I would be remiss not to talk about is that for example, some cyc lights that I really like, the version 1 of them had 16-bit option and the version 2 didn't. And I was like, I started yelling and screaming about it. But what I realized is what they did is they smoothed the steps in the fixture for those 8 bits. So it becomes less necessary to have that. They just do it in software-ish, in software on the hardware. Right. And the problem with that is it relinquishes control from me, which I'm, lighting designers are control freaks, but, but I have to say, I have both version 1s and versions 2s in my current show, and yeah, they're pretty good.
Next question.
From Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia. He says, as an experienced front of house audio guy and used audio switcher, whatever that means, I was pretty surprised at how bad the UX or user interface, I guess, for lighting consoles is. Who is the ATEM of DMX lighting consoles?
Go ahead, Swallow.
Well, Dave, I would have to disagree with you because here's the thing. If I sit in front of a sound console and I look at that UX, I have the same reaction. So it's just a matter of what you're used to. It's like I get a lot of questions about whether to use Grand MA consoles or Hog consoles or ETC consoles, but it has to do with having learned in a very vertical way how these systems work, and when those things change, we get really mad. And I think that's the key is that. When you're looking at that, you're looking at it in relation to the sound console, and so it's not quite right. Now, on the other hand, there are some pretty bad ones, and so for me, I can't even say this because I don't want to say like they're better ones than others, because there's 7 designers or 20 designers that come knocking on my door saying, I love that console. So it's just how it works.
And there's a lot of, for simple stuff, or even medium stuff, there's a lot of iPad apps and Mac apps, and, you don't have to have a console either, right? I mean, you have Luminaire is one I've seen other people use that just kind of, they're not going to have the same level that you're going to see with something like an ETC, but if you have a simple lighting control, if you're looking for an ATEM, I guess ATEM version, I guess ATEM mini version, and then I guess the thing that I've seen the most is little Chauvet ones for like, I want something just sitting around that I can move some sliders up and down and make the lights go. So there are definitely smaller versions of it that doesn't have to be the full console
Yeah, I think that's important to point out is that a lot of people, and particularly in the film and television industry, just like having a slider, like having a physical thing in their hand that they can slide up and down.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of consoles, small inexpensive consoles that allow you to do that, that don't even have a UI, that they essentially just slide up and down, and you have, if you have 24 sliders, you have 24 DMX addresses, and one universe. Then you start to get into those same kind of slider panels that also have a patch, the ability to patch.
Yeah. And
they still don't have much of a UI. It's just like an LCD readout. Drives me nuts. Like, how do you get in there and figure out what's what? You can't look at it. It's really tricky.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Do people make interfaces that let you use like a MIDI control surface for mixing with DMX that'll translate the sliders that are normally used for mixing sound levels into light levels?
Yes, there's MIDI. There's definitely MIDI interfaces between like the ETC consoles and I think the Grand MA consoles as well. Where we tend to work and is in MIDI show control and in MIDI timecode when it comes to those things, because you can have two different kinds of things, like a sound console and a lighting console. We often do a situation where the stage manager will only call lighting cues, but a MIDI show control will fire the next sort of mic setup on the console. Will fire cues inside the sound console, and so it sort of pulls it can pull everything together in a good way, and it can allow sound mixers to get out in front of what I like to call out in front of the airplane, so they don't have to think about what to mute and unmute with a 25-person show with all their own wireless mics, and they can just mix the show and listen to it, and they don't have to think about what's coming and how it's cued.
Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, he says, do any fixtures use the RDM standard these days to report their health back to the console?
Go ahead, Floyd.
Yep. Yeah, that's what RDM is primarily for. It'll tell you whether or not there's a problem, or there's some error, or the light needs to be reset. So yeah, absolutely.
Next question.
Mike Beardmore in Bedford, UK says, is it a thing to translate between MIDI and DMX for AV, and does the timing sync correctly?
Yeah. So again, this is what we were just sort of talking about. Yeah, it does time up well. It's not that you're directly translating it. It's that you're taking it's abstracted, right? You might connect a MIDI channel to a channel in the lighting console and turn that up and down. So it doesn't mean that you're trying to take those frames and line them up. It means that you're just doing it by control. It's sort of like OSC, and these consoles all take OSC as well. And so you're moving up and down proverbial sliders rather than trying to match up the DMX frames.
Yeah, and there's an app for that called MIDI ArtNet, which is designed to kind of go that direction. So the some of those things can be figured out there. It looks like just a mapping software. Next question. Oh, can't hear you, Courtney.
Sorry. From Brian Austerhout in Modesto, California, says, how do you route DMX signals into visualization software like Unreal?
Go Tom.
So you're going to take it into the computer where Unreal is, and so you're essentially got to make sure that the subnet that you're working in is the same coming out of the lighting console, and it's going to send ArtNet or SACN right to that software. And the module that you use in Unreal is going to be able to read that ArtNet, and you'll have to then patch every one of your fixtures in there just like you would in real life. So let's say I dropped in a Roby 600 into Unreal. I would have to give it a starting address and a universe, and then I would then go into the console and patch. And now I'm going to share my screen again and show what patching is like. And that way it might be a little bit more clear. So if I go over here to patch, you see there's a list of channels, 1 through 10 in this case, and then there's an address, and the address is going to be the starting address to the and it'll list the starting address to the ending address of that fixture. So if I say I want to patch for at address, let's say 75, it's going to make it a dimmer, and so there's going to be only one. There's going to be only one address there. But I can go over here and make this into, for example, an LED RGB unit, and I'm going to make it 16 bits. So now you can see it added that extra, that ending address as well. And so you have to go to the unit and say, I want this starting address to be 75. And then it'll, on that universe, it's going to go 75 to 84. But now let's assume that this is not on universe 1. So now I can say, well, 4 should be at address 5/75. And so now I've just moved that to universe 5.
Next question.
Sorry, my mouse is misbehaving today. James Haldane in Vancouver, British Columbia says, is it possible to use a multimeter to determine whether our 3-pin cables are XLR or DMX? We have some cables, but we're uncertain about their specific type.
Yeah. James, go ahead and ping me on Discord. I need to go look up the actual impedance levels so you can check the.
Yeah, I think that they're significantly different. So I think that the if I'm correct, the XLR I think is at 70, and the DMX is either 110 or 120.
Yeah,
so
that sounds right to me.
So it's like if it's so I think that those are the numbers you want to look for there. Go ahead, John.
You can't do it with just a multimeter. You have to have some sort of way to generate AC and measure. You could do it with the scope, or there's handheld TDRs that will do check the impedance.
Next question.
Next one comes in from Mike Beardmore in Bedford, UK. Says, how does the life cycle of theater hardware compare with the computing tech ones? Less than 5 years support?
Go ahead.
20, 30.
Yeah. They last a long time.
And the reason for that is money, right? I mean, what happens is that a lot of these theaters rely on donations and grants. And so there's this big activity. You want to do a big refit, and donators and grant givers, they forget about how things have to actually be maintained and upkept. And so they want to do it once and have it be fine forever. And that's actually why these life cycles are like this. In the 90s, there was a bunch of money moving around in the theatrical world. And so a lot of these theaters you walk into were upgraded in 95.
And I got to say, it's when you go into a theater that has been built in the last 2 or 3 years, it's just amazing. Like if they knew what they were doing, if they actually brought experts in. And the big thing is they didn't bring the mistake that a lot of theaters that we've gone into or studios that we've gone into is they go to integrators and they ask them to build this all out for them and everything else, but they don't talk to people who are actually going to use it. So when you bring in specialists, and some integrators have great specialists that do this all the time, that do production, and then they really know what they're talking about. So you just want to go to an integrator that's actually executing against what they build. But in a studio or a theater where you actually talk to lighting designers and you actually talk to the audio engineers and you actually talk and you have these round tables. There's a handful of theaters, and there's one in Dumbo that is just unbelievable. And it's just like everything is all built exactly the way you'd want it, exactly where you need it. It is amazing, but most of them are not that way. Most of them are like, how are we going to interface into this thing? Because this hasn't been used for the last 15 years. So,
But on the other hand, I will say that, the technicians in the theatrical world, and I would say also in the studio world, we know how to deal with this situation, and so it's not actually like how do we do it. It's like, oh yeah, we have 17 boxes of things that allow us to do that as people come in.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it really is. I just got to give a shout out to the technicians of this industry, because
I mean, the thing that
amazing.
The biggest thing that I've seen that has changed a lot is fiber. You know, it's just that we see so much glass getting put into a lot of the newer theaters that is just like, we will be. And when you talk to them, they're like, well, when we run a TAC 12 everywhere, or we run sometimes more than that, like some of them are talking about higher numbers of glass. And I'm like, are you terminating all of those? No, we're just using one right now. But the run is hard. You know, the run is really hard. And we decided it was much cheaper to run 12 strands when we need one, or 96 strands when we need 20, or something like that. And it's just, we just run these cables through all this stuff. And it's just, we know that, and now they're thinking in 20 years, 30 years, like, we know that this glass, unless it's severed, is going to be, just going to keep on letting us add features. And it's hard sometimes to get people to think that way, but it's oftentimes a 1% change in cost to, gives you forward thinking process for a long time. Next question.
Comes in from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. He says, discuss the SoundSwitch Control One professional DMX DJ Lighting Controller with 3 months SoundSwitch software access and DMX lights and Phillips hue support. How does it rate among DMX controllers?
It's Lolly.
Did you get on that?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in this question. There's a lot of DMX. There's a lot of DJ equipment in the world that is great for that kind of work. If you're trying to do things that kind of move in a lot of ways with the music, and it's not super fine tune kind of work, it's totally fine, and you can do it. The thing you want to be incredibly careful about is using a DJ light to light your studio situation, to light your important Zoom meeting, to light, those are the kinds of things that they don't care about. They don't care about color rendering on your skin. They don't care about making things super soft and really, really high end for your camera. That's just not how they're thinking. They're thinking about putting it into a club and changing the colors of the lights and moving them around with the music, which is exactly what that particular thing needs. And so I can't say I've used the SoundSwitch Control One, but that is the intent of that work, of that kind of controller, is to be able to do the work that you do in a club. And that's a really important thing. And I'm often asked about ETC versus Hog versus Grand MA versus DJ controllers. This has to do with what work you're doing with it. If you're trying to do opera with a Grand MA, it is really frustrating because it's not thought of as a Q-Stack kind of console. I mean, you can do Q-Stack console work, but it's just a little bit more of a lift. Same thing goes with ETC. If you're trying to take ETC and busk with it, they've come a long way because they bought Hog, but it's just not built to build buttons that you can busk with and play the lights like a piano, right? It's not a Q-Stack. Right. It's literally like, I'm turning this on now, I'm turning that on now, I'm turning that on now. It's like you have to be a player of an instrument to make that thing happen. So, and they're coming together, these things, these higher end things are coming together. But what you want to look at is what do these controllers have? And what do you need to do? When it comes to the Phillips hue support, I don't know if those use DMX, but I bet you that if you go to GitHub, somebody's made a translator for them so that they can be controlled by your console. Because that's the kind of thing we do.
Beyond busking and theater work, is there a track-based, like I want to, like I know I have a song and I want all this stuff to go. Is there anything you can just lay down tracks of, like, I want these behaviors to happen during this time?
Yeah, so QLab might work pretty well for that, because there's a lighting component of QLab, but also in the ETC world and in all of these other consoles, you can do time code. Right. And so if you generate time code from where your track is, and then you put you put the firing on that time code moment. It is really powerful, because here's the problem: if you're doing a cue stack that wants to happen the same time every time on a particular song, and then you change your mind, and you've done it with auto follows, and then you change your mind on the first one, you have to change your mind on all of them. So by pulling it in on a time code, you just say, okay, I'm going to move that time code a little bit, and it doesn't affect anything else.
Right. Last question.
Yeah. Paul, by the way, disco's dead. Pack up your mirror ball and go. Douglas Carmichael asks, what is the difference between the 3 DMX modes?
Gosh, I'm not 100% sure if Douglas is referring to straight DMX versus ArtNet versus SACN, or if he's talking about the different modes that different fixtures utilize, or if he's talking about speed. So there's a lot of different things modes that this could refer to. The difference between DMX, ArtNet, and SACN: DMX is directly plugged in via a single piece of copper from your gateway or your lighting console to your light. ArtNet is over IP, and it is utilizing a particular port and a particular packet size and protocol. And then SACN is doing exactly the same thing, but it has a different port and a slightly different packet size and protocol. But they're the same thing.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing what you know about this. It's amazing. Like, it's just, I think as we keep on having these conversations about the lighting and keep on putting these together, it's all starting to fit into pieces in my head. And hopefully we'll maybe drag you into a couple labs here and there, maybe to play with some tools.
That'd be a lot of fun. I'd love that.
Okay, sometime soon. All right, thank you so much. Thanks to the panel for all the great work and just the great answers, great conversation that we've had in the first and second hour. We can't do this without you. And thanks to the producers for all the great questions. Keeps us running through the first hour, keeps us running through the second hour. It really is an interesting thing that we generate this every day from scratch with very little stuff to hang on to. So we really depend on the producers to think of a couple questions about our second hour and think about a couple general questions in the first hour. And we depend on our panelists to be here and to be ready to answer those questions. So we really appreciate everybody's contribution to that. And we just, we just keep going. And so it's really, really great work. Thank you to the incredible team on the back end that makes this happen every single day, that plans these second hours. I feel like the second hour, this is a great week. We had a great week of second hours. And I think that the weeks are getting better and better because we have councils and we have Josh and Roy and we have, all, kind of managing all this stuff and putting those things together. And so, it's going to keep on getting better and better and better. And also we have this great dev team that keeps on making all this stuff run more smoothly. And then just the production team that here's here every day, cutting between all these things, making sure that the questions move around correctly and everything. There's a small village that makes this all possible. We really appreciate your contribution. 81,000 miles that we traveled today, 131,000 kilometers, and that's 645 million. I always forget to say million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into after hours. I still want to get my lights out, but I don't have time today. I don't have time to get them out, make them go different places. Soon.
You gotta get that karaoke system set up, right?
I know. I don't do karaoke. We just do lip sync.
Oh, lip sync. Okay.
So I've got the smoke machine. I got the lights, and I can make the lights do different things, and I do all that. But what I need to do is get behaviors and then time the behaviors to the specific songs, so that the kids submit the songs, and then I build the lighting package for each song. What?
Time code.
Exactly. So soon.
Disco's dead, Alex.
It's not disco. It's just stage lighting for lip sync. It's not disco. There's no disco ball. But there are lasers. I got lasers.